And at this time, I would invite Larry and Rhonda Voss to come forward. They are speaking to us today about a ministry that is near and dear to my heart, First Love. And you're going to hear what God has put on their heart and the amazing adventure that they are on as followers of Jesus Christ. We are so blessed that both of you are here. Thank you for coming.
Thanks. Okay, I've got to get my timer on here so I make sure not to go over. I want to thank, again, Pastor Mark and Marianne for inviting Rhonda and I here. We got together with them early in the summer to talk about some of the new things that were happening with First Love, in Kenya especially. And so they invited us to come and share with you today. I don't know what's all about with the donuts, but I like the idea. Brings back some great memories. I actually grew up in Immanuel when it was over on Park Row. And I remember as a little guy, probably not much older than these guys, some of us would have the sneak and diversion tactic where we would go down in the basement where the adults were. Then we discovered there were donuts down there, and we would try and sneak in and get a donut, and they always shoot us out. So we struck out. If I like donut, that's good. So imagine you get home this afternoon and maybe you're going to be watching the game, or later tonight you're going to be flipping on the TV and turning on one of your favorite shows that you've been waiting to see what's been happening on. And the first part of the show comes on, the little introduction, and it goes to the first commercial break. So you're sitting there and one of those commercials comes on that always comes on. It's the "Do you have one of these symptoms?" type commercials, and they go through all the things, and you're thinking, can't you just get back to my show? I don't have any of those symptoms. But we think about it, this list of syndromes just seems to be getting bigger and bigger and weirder. There's some pretty bizarre ones out there. The walking corpse syndrome, this is real. The human werewolf syndrome, or the alien hand syndrome, where people believe that their hand has a will of its own, kind of like when you're reaching for a little extra something. I do that at the dinner table sometimes. My hand just kind of takes over. But there's one syndrome that I think all of us have that we'd probably have to admit that we have, and that's the Cinderella syndrome. And that's when we hear a great story that really resonates with our heart. It makes us feel good. Could be something like this from the Bible. The shepherd boy David kills Goliath and eventually becomes king of Israel. Or how about the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team when they beat Russia and go on to get the gold medal? Makes us feel good. Or when Kelly Clarkson wins the first American Idol and becomes a huge music star. They make us feel good. But sometimes this syndrome happens in the opposite way, and we feel it just as much. Maybe it's something like when something good is going to happen and it doesn't. Like when the Cubs lose 3 straight and don't go to the World Series again. So, poor Cubs. The prophet Samuel, another person in the Bible, has one of these great stories where he starts off real young and becomes one of the greatest people in Israel's history. You know, when God starts building a relationship with us, a lot of times that relationship starts before we really even recognize what God's doing with us. We may not realize that He's doing anything in our life. My pastor kind of calls that the putting out the vibe. Guys, remember that when you're in school, maybe in college or after high school, and someone catches your eye, and you're thinking, wow, she's kind of interesting. I wonder what she thinks of me. And then you start kind of doing nice things to get their attention. My wife and I, Rhonda, had the same experience happen to us. We went to Bible school to Moody down in Chicago. And we actually met on a blind date. And I was still living here in the Lake Geneva area, and she was living on campus during the summer. And so I would drive the 2 hours down to the campus, hang out, hopefully to run into her, and never did. So I'd leave notes, leave little gifts at the desk for her at the gals' dorm, just in the hopes to get to know her. Then the time comes. School was back in session. We'd run into each other, and it comes time for the big ask where you have to, hey, do you want to go do something? Do you want to go get ice cream or get, in our case, it was a pizza. And, you don't know. How are they going to react? The reason was because she didn't really know me personally. She had seen me. I had seen her. I didn't really know her personally to really know what she was like. It was kind of a gamble. It was a risk. God was doing the same thing with Samuel as he was a little boy. He was putting out the vibe, so to speak, or putting out, hey, Samuel, I'm here. I'm not going to read through all the verses, just kind of give you a few ideas. Throughout chapter 2, there's all these places where it says, the boy Samuel served God, or the boy Samuel grew up with God. The boy Samuel was blessed by God. You see, Samuel was responding to God's initiative, or his vibing, if you want to call it that, by serving him, even though he didn't know him personally yet. In chapter 3, verse 7, we kind of got a little idea of what Samuel's relationship was like with God. It says, this all happened before Samuel knew God for himself. It was before the revelation had been given to him personally. So it's just kind of like that first date relationship. You don't really know the person. You're hoping that they respond the way you would like to, but it's not a guarantee. You see, Samuel had to learn a new voice. God's voice to him was different. Up until that point, he'd been listening to Eli, the priest, and he was basically getting his information about God and who God was through Eli. As we heard in the first lesson, Samuel kind of had three wrong numbers, so to speak. He was listening, he was hearing, he would get up, go to Eli. No, it's not me. I'm not calling Eli. Go back to bed. Happened 3 times. Finally, Eli realizes, hey, something special is going on here. Maybe it's God that's calling Samuel. So he said to him, go back to bed. If the voice calls again, respond. Say this, speak, God, I'm your servant, ready to listen. See, sometimes someone young, or even someone like us, we need someone to speak into our life. Maybe it's a young person needing a mentor to help show them, here's where you go. Here's how you respond. Here's what you do to go to the next place in your life. I'm sure a lot of us can think back to someone that influenced us when we were young. A mentor, someone that was important to us. With Rhonda and I, we've been working with First Love, not physically, but volunteering, doing trips for about 10 years now. Rhonda had a good mutual friend of ours that went to our church, kept saying to Rhonda, hey, I go on these trips over to Kenya, and we build things, and we work with the kids. Why don't you come along with us? You'd have a great time. It would be awesome. And it didn't work out, and then, the next year he'd say, hey, we're going to Kenya. Why don't you come? You could help us. You could work with the kids. It would be great. I can't make it this year. So finally, it came about where she was able to go. Sometimes when God is speaking to us and we're trying to listen to this voice, he uses other people to kind of speak for him. He was using this friend of ours to say, hey, why don't you come along and see what I'm doing in Kenya and see if that's something that resonates with you. Like I said, it's been 10 years now since we've been connected with First Love. We were just there last January, and we went, to do projects, to work, to be with the kids. Rhonda is a nurse, so she was doing evaluations and assessments with the kids and helping with their medical needs. But we also went looking to see, was God speaking to us specifically to come live in Kenya all the time, full time, for a long time. And it was a couple days in that Rhonda and I each came to each other and we said, this kind of feels like home. And Rhonda's like, wow, I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what I'm feeling too. Since then, we've come back. We've started selling things, having our own rummage sales, sold lots of stuff. Basically, at this point, we own a bed and a dresser and our clothes. as we're getting ready to leave. Our house, hopefully, will have word on a closing date next week. It'll all be sold. And a lot of people have come to us and say, wow, how can you do that? How can you make such a huge jump? How do you know if you're doing the right thing? And I think about it, I shared this with some friends of ours. I'm like, think about those guys that jump off the big cliffs into the ocean, down in Mexico. Maybe you've seen it on TV or maybe you've been able to be there. They're up there a couple hundred feet and they watch the water and they jump off and dive in and then they swim to the side and everyone cheers. Do you think those guys started at 200 feet up? Or did they maybe start 3 or 4 feet up and jumped and learned how to do it, and then they went up to 10 feet and jumped and learned how to do it, and they kept moving up, building confidence, understanding, listening to other people that had done it, and say, now you need to watch. You're going to dive, and there's no water there yet, but the wave is going to come in, and you're going to land in the water, and it's going to be good. In John 10, Pastor Marianne read this. It says, the shepherd leads them, and they follow because they're familiar with his voice. When you're faced with something big in your life, if you can follow a voice that you recognize, that you trust, sometimes it's not so scary then to step out into something big or something new. And that's what our journey's been like. We've been listening to God for 10 years, and finally he said to us, it's time to go. As we think about the kids that are over in Kenya that we work with, it's always fun to see them. It's amazing to hear their stories of where they've come from and how they're different. And we always think, what can this one kid do to have an impact, maybe in the children's home with the other kids, but once they leave and go out into the world, are they going to be able to have an impact? And we see one more little thing about Samuel, of what God was doing with him, how one person can change a nation. If you go back in and read through chapter 3, we don't have time to do that this morning, but it was a dark time for Israel. In chapter 3, verse 1, it was read earlier, it said that it was a time when the revelation of God was rarely seen or heard. Not even the priests were hearing God. They didn't see the things that God was doing. Imagine that. Imagine if Pastor Mark and Marianne had no idea what God was doing here at Immanuel because God wasn't working. That would be a hard time for all of us. And that's what it was like for Israel then. But God had something in mind. He had a turning point, and it was this boy Samuel. In verse 9, it said, this was the 4th time that God came. It said, then God came and stood before him exactly as before, calling out, Samuel, Samuel. I mean, that could be pretty clear if God came and stood right before you and told you what he wanted you to do. We have to listen a little more close because that doesn't always happen these days. I want to go on a little bit and kind of see a little more of the story of after Samuel grows up a little. He's not much older, maybe a teenager possibly. In chapter 19, it says, Samuel grew up, God was with him, and Samuel's prophetic record was flawless. Everyone in Israel, from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south, recognized that Samuel was the real thing, a true prophet of God. God continued to show up at Shiloh, revealing through his word to Samuel at Shiloh. One person, even a young person, had a major impact on the history of an entire country. But as I read that, did you see something maybe that was missing from the other verses that I read? The other verses I was reading, it said, the boy Samuel, the boy Samuel. Here, he was just called Samuel. After God met with him and spoke with him, he wasn't called the boy anymore. God had promoted him, had given him a mission in life to change the country, to listen to him, to follow his voice, and to do the work that God had for him to do. That's pretty cool, seeing how God can use a young person to affect that many people. I want to tell you real quick a little story about one of the girls that we know in Kenya at the children's home. Her name is Zipporah, and she's kind of one of First Love's Cinderella stories. I've got a picture of her if you want to throw that up. She's the girl up in the middle, the older girl. Zipporah Zipporah became an orphan while still a toddler when she was only about 9 months old. Her mother passed away after an illness, and it was reported that her father had been hanged while working far away from the family. An aunt in Nairobi took her in, but was regularly mistreated, left alone, and not fed. She was eventually given to another aunt up country. This aunt treated Zipporah like a slave, abusing and overworking her. Her responsibility required her to care for 6 of her cousins, of which one was completely handicapped. A First Love worker heard about her situation and, out of concern for Zipporah, came to First Love asking for assistance. Could they do something to help this girl? Reluctantly and in fear of the authorities, the aunt agreed to send Zipporah to live at the First Love Children's Home. However, just before the First Love team could get there, the aunt forced her to go through a horrible ritual mutilation practice. She's now 17 years old and a great example of a life changed. First Love's worked with her, helped her physical healing, helped her emotional healing, taught her about the Lord. Here's some of Zipporah's own words, or Zippy, as they like to call her. She said, "Through First Love, I've found Jesus. My life has changed. He's given me hope and joy. He's helped me to be a role model and a mentor to the younger children. I like to show them the way, to listen to their problems and help them with homework. I'm so thankful that people give of themselves so other kids can have a bright future like mine." That's just one kid that had a horrible beginning, but that's having a huge impact. And she's ready to head out into the world. She just graduated from high school. She's getting ready to turn 18. One of the sad things, like in most countries in the world, when you turn 18, you can't stay at the children's home anymore. By law, she's going to have to leave. And up until now, there's been nothing for her to do, no place to go. But what First Love is doing is they're building a transition home called Daraja House. In Swahili, which is one of the national languages, Daraja means bridge. So it's a bridge to move from childhood, living in orphan care, to living on their own as an independent adult that's going to change their country. See, there's a lot of kids like that at First Love that need a mentor. They need someone to come alongside them, help them with their next steps, help them figure out what they're going to do as an adult. And there's really 4 things that First Love does when it comes to orphan care. The first is simply we rescue the kids that are in risk. We find out about a child that doesn't have any parents, who's living in a tough situation. We bring them in. And right now, there's about 160 kids that First Love completely cares for, takes care of all their needs 100%. We would like to then go on to help renew their body, their mind, and their spirit. When Rhonda and I was there in January, we were sitting in our room one afternoon, and all the kids had come back from school. So at our front window, we're hearing the kids in the dining hall all singing praise and worship songs. And it was raining, which is a weird time for that time of year. It's pretty dry then. Out our back window, we hear this giggling, and we're wondering what's going on. We look out the window, and here's a little boy about 6 running through the pasture in the rain, giggling and laughing, having a great time. You can't worship God like that. You can't be that free and enjoy life unless God has started to renew you. So that's one of the things we do. We restore a future and a hope, just like our kids here. They have aspirations. They want to do something. What do you want to do with your life? And a lot of them say, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a pilot. And a lot of the kids won't do those things, just like our kids don't always do the first things that they want to do when they're younger. But what they're saying is, I want to do something to help other people. They've been helped, and they want to, in turn, help others. And lastly, we want to return godly leaders back into the community. It's amazing how young of a population Kenya really is. One stat that we've found is that, how does that go? Half the population in Kenya is under 18. That's amazing to think that young people, teenagers, right out of high school, are going to be the ones that are going to affect their country the most in the next 10 years. So Daraja House is going to be our main ministry. It's under construction, where I'm going to be heading over in January to start doing some work there. In a few minutes, we're going to watch a video that kind of shows where these kids come from, a slum called Kibera, and you'll see some pictures and see some statistics. And then towards the end of it, you'll see where they live now at the First Love Children's Home, and you'll see this massive difference in their lives. As you watch it, I want you to think about a couple things. Maybe God is putting the vibe out to you. Maybe he's saying, hey, take a look at what I'm doing in Kenya. Maybe he'll be calling out to you with his voice, hoping that you would follow him, challenging you to be a part of what he's doing in some way. Maybe he has a mission for you to complete. Just like with Samuel, if God has a mission for him and you're listening and following, God's going to show up in that mission to help you accomplish it. You can make a difference. Even just sitting here in Lake Geneva, you can have a difference with the kids in Kenya. And in your program this morning, there's a sheet here. There's some ways that you can help. You can pray for us. You can join our email list. You could sponsor a kid. If you want to get some information or talk to someone, just check that. And the way that we live is we raise support. So if you would be so willing to maybe contribute in that way, that would be awesome too. And we'll be out in the back if you'd like to talk with us. And again, thanks.